Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, everybody. It's so good to know many of you online. Of course, we know each other in person, so I'm very glad that you joined our little online coaching with David Beckett on how to make you an effective and powerful online presenter. And the reason why I wanted to run this sort of a coaching session for you and with all of you, because obviously presenting online is very, very different than presenting in person. And presenting on stage, you might be very comfortable talking to hundreds of people, but presenting online requires a totally new skill set. Now, all of you have been working really hard, and I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart that you put in so much effort in bringing world-class content to the Digital HR Innovation Week next week. We have around 1,800 registrations, so no pressure, but considering the average show up on the webinar date, usually about 50% of people will show up. So just remember, when you are actually looking at your camera and looking in your camera, you are talking to almost 1,000 people. So no pressure. And of course, when it comes to effective communication, is a fraction of percentage, maybe 10, 20% of what you say in terms of a content. But how you say it is way more important. And we've all been through exciting and inspiring presentations and sessions, and we've all been through very boring and dull sessions as well. Now, the big difference is when it comes to a live conference, even if you are not a world-class presenter, if people want to leave the room, it does require a bit of a significant effort to get up from the chair, walk out the room, everybody's looking at you while you're leaving. So then, even if you're not a great presenter, the audience is likely to stay. In an online environment, it is totally different. If you're not capturing the attention of the audience in the first few seconds, if you're not interesting and engaging, no matter how great your content is, people will simply switch off because it's just so easy. Nobody sees them. They just press the switch off button and just leave. All your hard work and all your effort go wasted. Now, this is what I don't want. I want to make sure that when you are on a virtual stage with your amazing content, you are an amazing presenter as well. So this is why I actually reached out to David Beckett to come and help us how we can improve, how we can be better presenters, not just offline, but also online as well, because this is the new reality. Whether we like it or not, probably we shall be presenting more and more online. We leapfrogged into the future. So David, a short introduction, an online presentation trainer who has coached hundreds of people and helped startups pitching in bringing the message across literally in a couple of minutes. So he helped to pitch over 250 million euros investment for his clients, and also coached more than 15,000 professionals from companies like Unilever, IKEA, PwC, Google, Booking.com, just to name a few. And he's also the author of the book Pitch to Win. And he's specializing on getting your message across effectively and quickly, particularly these days in an online environment. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome David. I'll make you, David, good to have you here. I'm deactivating my webcam.
Hi.
The virtual stage is all yours.
Okay, thanks very much, Mihaly. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to share you my screen. And let's talk about presenting online. And as Mihaly explained, I have some experience of working, especially as a pitch coach. In the last 2 months, I've spent all my time focusing on what are the challenges for people presenting online. And so that's been my massive focus in this period. I heard a great phrase a few weeks ago, which was pivot to where the world's going. So we have to think of this as being something that's going to be a part of our lives for the future. So it's good to get a grip of these skills as quickly as possible. Now, what I'd like to share with you is my background. As Mihaly explained, I've worked with a lot of startups, and startups have to tell their story in 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Now, of course, you're telling your story in longer presentations, but what I've discovered is that many of the tools that I learned to share with startups are really working with longer speeches as well. And I've worked with TEDx speakers. I've trained over 30 TEDx speakers at CERN, Amsterdam, and in Munich, and applying many of the same techniques and tools to help people get their story across. And my number one driver is that I believe that great ideas need a voice that's more than ever needed now, because we're in a time of massive change. Things are going to change beyond all recognition they already have, and they will keep changing. So people with great ideas that can solve problems, that can help people overcome challenges, those are going to need to be heard. So we need to find our voice for those great ideas. And that's what we're here for today, is to help you find your voice. Now, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them in the questions box. There's a number of times to ask those questions. You can raise them anytime you like, but I will stop a few times during the presentation to give you an opportunity to have your questions answered. So if you have some questions, do feel free to type those into the questions box. I'll give you those answers at certain moments. So why is it so difficult to present online? Well, when we present face-to-face, we usually have 6 tools available, and that is the words that you say, the slides that we use to support that story, and our voice. Then we have body language, we have eye contact, so we can connect with the audience, we can see them, they can see our eyes, and we can feel the audience. This is a bit of an intangible one. Are people enjoying it? Are they connecting? Are they understanding what this is all about? Now, when we present online, we lose, firstly, the body language. Now, of course, body language can still have a factor, can be a factor, but it's much less so, because normally you are a thumbnail compared to the slides. You lose eye contact. They can see you, but it's actually pretty difficult to keep focus on the camera. For example, I'm just going to look at the camera right now. Now I'm going to look at my slides. And even though I've adjusted the camera to a level where I can look into it, it's pretty difficult to keep that connection. And of course, you can't make any connection with them. It's one way. And finally, you can't see the audience. There are some ways to connect with the audience, but you can't see them. So this is 3 of the big reasons why people find it really challenging. Then on top of that, of course, there is the technology, which plays an even bigger part than usual. Now, the technology for this event that you're coming up to is being taken care of. Nevertheless, I wanted to share a few of the challenges that people experience with technology, because you might have that in other presentations. You might be running your own webinars, you might be doing online meetings. So I think it's fair to say it's kind of an imperfect medium, but that's okay. We're in an imperfect world right now, and so we have to use the tools that are available. So we might have a different experience, but we can still aspire to a great impact. Our message can still land, can have a big impact on people's lives, the way they think and the way that they act. So I think there's 4 key aspects of presenting online. We're going to talk about the tech, a few of the things about setting up yourself to make that presentation, then the content and the slides. I'm talking less about what should be in the talk. I'll give you a very quick summary of my methodology for pitching. Maybe that will help you for building stories, but I think you're experts at that. But I'll talk a little bit about slide design, because that has a massive factor in presenting online. And then the voice. How do we put our energy and emphasis into this story? And finally, interaction. What are the tools to connect with the audience and feel the audience? So let's first talk about the technology. So naturally, you want to give yourself time, 15 to 30 minutes in advance, for a tech check, so that everything is working, that the audio and video settings are working, and that your screen share is working. Then internet speed. You can use speedtest.net. A quick guideline is that if you've got 3 Mbps upload as a minimum, then you can run an online meeting. And if you do speedtest.net, you'll find that that number means something to you. And if you're struggling, if you're finding it's below that, move closer to the modem or get wired. There's a wired connection to the modem. I would always recommend to start with your video off and on mute. Make sure there's no surprises. They don't hear you speaking before you get started. Again, Mihaly will arrange this for the event next week, but I wanted to emphasize this is really important, because actually I joined a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and I joined early and listened in to the whole tech check and so on. It was kind of fun, but it was certainly not what they intended. So someone might join earlier than you expect. And start when you're ready. Make sure that you have yourself on mute, your video off, and then when you are ready, then you can set everything on. If you are running your own event, set all attendees on mute, avoid weird sounds from the beginning, and you can unmute people if you need to, if you're in meetings or presentations. One thing that I've been testing quite a bit is with video. Does it work in online meetings and online presentations? And it rarely does. What you quite often find is that the sound comes through okay, but the video is choppy. So if you have audio clips or video clips, I would try to find other solutions for that. If it's absolutely essential, then test, test, and test again. But usually I would recommend to take it out. Now, in most systems, there are ways of sharing video using computer audio. So if you really need to do it, then, for example, in Zoom, there is a click computer sound. Sometimes there are options for that in various different systems. If you're using a system, that could be useful. But I must emphasize, in general, I would recommend to avoid it. And maybe you can find a different way to paraphrase or pick screenshots and talk over it to make that message land that you would normally use in a real life presentation. Do you want everyone's face on screen? Once again, we have that controlled here through Mihaly, but I've had the experience where people have got all these faces on screen. Actually, presenter view helps you overcome this. And now we come to, I think, probably the most important parts of the technical side. Let's say the audio, the video, it all works, it's running. The things like camera position, so avoid looking down on the audience. Raise the camera so that you can look at the audience, or can look at them as much in the eye as you possibly can. So it's more friendly to be on an equal level with the people. Then you'll notice that the background is a little bit messy. So firstly, avoid backlight. They need to be able to see your facial expression. So if you're finding that you're very dark and it's light in the background, you have a couple of choices. Firstly, of course, go to a different place, but maybe you don't have that option. Then get a lamp, just a simple desk lamp, and shine that a little bit away from you so that your face is lit up and they can see you. That's pretty important. I've had this in quite a few online meetings where this has come up, and there's at least one person out of 5 that you can't see. Then tidying up the background. Think about the message that you want to deliver. So I started with this. Now you'll see my very green background. I have a green screen studio. I think it's all about the message you want to deliver. Do you want to make it homely? Do you want to make it professional? And I thought it's kind of fun to have a look at the British government. You might have seen this. The British government has been running cabinet meetings with Zoom. They got found out, and actually you can see the ID, the meeting ID, in the top left corner of this video. So that's something to look out for. But let's just have a little look at how these guys presented themselves. So Boris Johnson, very simply PM in his naming, and a very simple background. Actually, the backlight was quite strong there, so probably that's not the best way of it, but it was carefully thought out. This color, this photograph in the background, he has the open collar, so there's a number of choices here. Then if you have a look at Jacob Rees-Mogg, he's actually a very aristocratic person. He has a very posh, well-spoken voice, and he's known as being a bit of an academic. That's why he's got his whole bookshelf in the background. And probably if you zoom in, you'll find that it's Greek and Latin authors. And it's a tie, you know, he's at home in the meeting, but he has a tie and a suit. So there's also a thing about what clothes do you wear? What message, what image do you want to project? Have a look at the next one. Liz Truss has a British flag growing out of her head. That might be something you want to avoid, having things sticking out of your head. I'll be honest, in the first online meetings, I had an ironing board behind me that was doing that. And I realized in the first meeting, we better move, better change this. So, you know, we're doing this in our homes. This is real life, but we need to just tidy up that background. This one is a bit insanely intense. This is the current health minister. A lot of books, a lot of pictures, and a very intense message. So this looks kind of weird. And finally, do make sure that the camera is at the right height. This makes the prominent figure in the government look very small, actually. So all of these things, you know, this is projecting a message. It might just be a thumbnail, but they are receiving something from your background and the clothing that you wear. So think about that message. You can also use virtual backgrounds in some programs, but in general, if you're struggling and you need a neutral background, just get a big sheet or a blanket and put that over the stuff behind you. We've also done that in the house here in a couple of places where we have meetings. So these are things that will help you. One final thing on the technical stuff, use a clicker, and I'm going to show you why. You might be able to hear this click, click, click effect when moving from slide to slide. So ironically, a clicker is actually a silent way of moving the slides onwards. It's a great thing that you use normally in real life, but it works perfectly for online presentations. And yeah, I'm a bit of a clicker nerd, so I use the Logitech R500. I've actually used all kinds of clickers, and I find this one works really well, plugs into any computer. I don't have any affiliate links, by the way. It's just a product I really like, the Logitech R500. If you really want to know the difference between this one and the R700, I can actually tell you, which is a bit sad. So that's the technical stuff. So I'd like to just check if you have any questions on the technical stuff. If there are questions, then feel free to ask now. You can type it in, and I'll give you a moment to do that. And if you don't have questions, then feel free to leave it blank and we'll move on. Okay, it looks like
I don't see questions coming in, David, so we can continue.
Yep, all good. Okay, let's continue. So that's the technical stuff. Next up is the content and the slides. And I don't want to talk too much about how do you create your storyline. I'll just share you 2 minutes of the methodology that I share in my pitch training, which is to highlight that we normally get started with typing stuff into PowerPoint. And my advice is always to stop and don't open PowerPoint when you're at the early stage of your story development. Use Post-it notes to get the story out of your head. Create a kind of a storyboard. Using Post-it notes to build your storyline helps you get a good beginning, middle, and end. You can brainstorm. Now, our brains don't really work with slide 2, bullet point 1, slide 2, bullet point 2. We work in a very random way when we're thinking and creating. So using Post-it notes is a great way to build your storyline. And I created a tool to help you with what topics. Now, again, you're very experienced speakers, so this might be very obvious stuff, but I wanted to share it with you anyway, because I've built a thing called the Speaker's Canvas, and you might find that there's 1 or 2 things in here that might trigger your thoughts to think, hey, I could make a small change here or an adjustment there. I'll give you a link for this at the end of the webinar. But I've used this with a number of companies who are presenting their story on stage, and it's a brainstorming tool. You use it with your Post-it notes. You think, okay, what's all the topics I'm going to talk about? What's the big idea here? Why do I care about this? What's the call to action? Are there any next steps I want these people to take? Could I have a personal wrap up, and so on? So that's really on the content. Once again, you're experts at this, so I didn't want to talk too much about it, but that's the brief version. By the way, I have a short online course for you, which is completely free. I give this for everybody who goes through my workshops. It's about half an hour of short video in 12 chapters, just to walk people through if you need to make a short pitch. So if you're looking to make a 1-minute or 3-minute pitch for something, this could be useful for you. Okay, I'll give you the link for that again at the end. But let's talk more about slide design, because it has a big part of the impact. Now, firstly, content. The content of your story is by far the most important thing, and I think that's a given. But the slides, because they take a large part of the visual impact compared to when you're in person, it's really worth spending special attention on slide design. It hugely influences attention engagement. Now, I'm not a designer, but I work with slide designers, and I've tried to package some of the main things that I see them do to help prompt a few thought points on slide design. So the first is tools to help keep it visual. So a classic way to do this would be to do it with bullet points. I could tell you that there are 3 ways to keep it visual. You can use images to express big ideas. You can use icons to highlight key points. You can be creative with typography, and you get the result The result is you tend to read line by line, point by point, and that tends to draw the energy out of the explanation. Now, especially when you're only relying on your voice, this kind of structure makes it really difficult to put energy and emphasis into it. So there's a different way to do this, and a fairly simple way without too much different work, and that would be to use icons. So there's 3 tools to help keep it visual. Firstly, there's images. Images help you communicate a story in a second. People make associations in a heartbeat, and they quickly understand the concept. Then there's icons. Icons are all around us. People see icons in their everyday life on their phone, and they communicate abstract ideas very quickly. And then there's fonts, which is sometimes where it goes wrong, but you can use typography to create emphasis and focus in the slides. So as you see, that's a different way of presenting the same information. If I show you that information in the previous way, it's visually very different. This sort of tells the person you have to do some work to process this. When you see it visually, it feels completely different. And for people at home who are watching virtually, as Mihaly mentioned, the attention span is so short, and the ability for them to switch off, go do something else is so easy that we need something to keep them going all the way through the talk. So this kind of visual approach will help. So in terms of text, if you can convert text into bullet points and add a visual, this will make it much easier. Here, this text that you see on the left is really summarized into these 3 points together with a visual. It makes it much easier for the person to process that information and then listen to your story. On top of this, you can use icons. All of the text that's mentioned on the left here is replaced with the icons here. Now you might wonder, well, will I remember what to say? But we're really good at knowing what to say based on visual prompts. We tend to remember things in paragraphs. So when we see something, we tend to remember what the next paragraph is. We just need structure to remind us what's coming next, and the visuals will help you. I would highly recommend keep data simple. This is in any way important for presentations in general, but especially in online presentations. And I must confess, this slide was one that I presented in my last corporate job. And of course, this is way too much information. So my advice is always to keep data simple. If there's a big number you want to communicate that with one big number on the screen. If you want to communicate a trend, try to strip out all the information in the graph and just get the most essential stuff, and then the communication, the message that comes from that graph side by side with the text, with the visuals and the numbers. So this is a way to try to help them follow the data and keep it simple. Then we all love 3-part stories. We love to see things in 3s. So if you can break things down into 3s, that is a good way of helping people. And I'll talk a little bit about animation, how you can keep people focused on the thing that you are speaking about. Once again, if you have any questions, do feel free to raise those in the question block. There's no questions at the moment, so I'm going to carry on.
We do have one question from, yes, we do have one question from Luke Sombetsky from ABN AMRO. And the question from Luke is that, do you also suggest to use different fonts in one presentation to emphasize something?
So what I recommend, actually, if you have a look on here, what you'll see is that there is a thin font and a thick font. And maybe I can take you out of the presentation here, and I will show you how that might work. So you'll notice that I consistently have one line of small text, one line of bold capitals here. So here and here and here, you'll see that there is one font. It's one font family, but it's one light, one bold. And that creates a kind of hierarchy. It tells you which is the more focused point. And I do this partly because I think I personally find it more attractive, but it's also what I see a designer that I work with. I think he's one of the best in the Netherlands. And he's always doing this kind of different sizes, different focus points. So it helps to create focus. And what you find here is that I have one font here, and I have also the same font in the body text. You can have one headline font and one body font. More than that, I would say keep it simple. My former boss, one of the most brutal people I met, but was really inspirational. He always said, don't make your slides look like an explosion in a type factory. And I thought this was a good advice. So basically, normally one headline font, one body copy. But if your headline font has a thin and a black or an extra bold, then you can play with that to create emphasis. Okay. Then let's move on if there's no more questions for now. Yep. All right, so we're going to talk briefly about animation. Does animation work when presenting online? And I think the basic principle of animation for me is ensure they look at what you're talking about and when you are talking about it. Now, that's consciously animated. I've animated it so that I ensure that they look at what you're talking about when you're talking about it. Now, probably you've had some kind of latency between what I've said and when you see it. Nevertheless, the animation still kind of works, also online. And I think the purpose of online presentation should be, or the things to do, make sure it's considered. That means that you do it for a reason. And that is always get them to focus on the thing that we're talking about at this moment. So firstly, considered. Secondly, I would make it simple. So I actually have a couple of different animations in this presentation compared to when I do it face-to-face. I have this pop animation, which I really like, and it gives a bit more emphasis to things, but it doesn't really work online. Anything that's sort of out of the ordinary that isn't a fade doesn't really work online. It can be choppy and it looks a bit odd. So a simple fade is the safest online animation. And I would suggest to make it consistent. If you are going to have two different types of animation, then use one for text and one for images. And I would have the same thing for transitions. Have one standard transition between slides. My standard is fade to black and a certain time of that, so that it's always the same. It always gives a feeling of consistency to people. So fade to black in PowerPoint or Keynote, you can do that. So now what you see here is there's three things. And if I'd simply put this slide up, maybe while I was talking about considered, you might be thinking about consistent. That's why I say considered and talk about considered, then next simple and talk about simple, and finally consistent and then talk about consistent. So I would always recommend to follow this path. Where possible, use visuals. Try to convert text into visuals and use keywords together with the visuals. That will help them to follow, help them concentrate. They understand the theme of what you're talking about, and then you talk over it. Not too many images at once, because then people don't really know where to focus. And do avoid stretching the image. Sometimes you want a full screen image, but it doesn't fit. Then just stretch it off the frame, or make it less than the full screen and give it a frame, give it a border. And make sure the images are high resolution. This seems obvious, but I've seen a few pictures. If we pick something up, we've got a presentation from a few years ago, it might still have a pixelated image. So check that all the pictures are high resolution. And if you're looking for free, good images, I have a couple of locations. One tip is the answer isn't Google. And it's really dangerous to pick pictures straight up off Google. Firstly, sometimes the resolution is very low. And secondly, they might be from iStock, they might be from Getty Images, all those places where they're normally selling, and they are doing, they have artificial intelligence crawling the web to find people using their pictures without paying for it. I've actually had a couple of startups be sued for exactly that. However, a couple of really good locations. Firstly, pixabay.com. It's Creative Commons commercial use. That means you could use it in advertising, on your website, in your presentation. You can use it anywhere. So Pixabay is my preferred location. I can highly recommend it. I have loads of pictures. I think all the pictures from this presentation are from Pixabay. A couple of other locations, Pexels and Gratisography, all the same concept, Creative Commons commercial use. You don't have to pay, you don't have to attribute. Now they do have a method whereby you can donate a cup of coffee. And hey, we are also creators, so I do that every now and again. But fundamentally, it's free. You can use it for anything. The same goes for icons. That's a little bit more tricky to find good icons. I recommend a thing called the Noun Project. You can use a lot of the icons for free. They also have a low price yearly subscription. And if you're going to use a lot of icons, I would recommend the subscription because you can integrate it in some other software and so on. It's pretty handy to have the subscription. But of course, every euro, every cent counts. So if you just need to use a few icons, use the Noun Project ones. They have loads of icons and you can use most of them for free. So the Noun Project is a good place to look. So any other questions on slide design and the visuals that you support your story with? All clear, I think.
No
Okay.
questions, David. Yeah.
No questions? All right, good. Then I'm going to move on to voice, because the voice really has a massive impact. It's the most effect of your whole presentation is with your voice. And that's challenging because we're presenting to a camera. We're not presenting to people. And normally we feed off the energy of the people, and our voice is highly related to that energy. We connect with people. We see, are they liking this? If they like it, we put more energy into it. If they're struggling, we try to put focus on emphasizing something or making a better explanation of something. So it's really difficult when we don't see them. So the challenge is to put energy and emphasis into the story with your voice, even when you don't see the audience. So I have one thing to highlight this and a method that you can use for your key messages, and then a couple of tools that will help you with this on top. The first thing, though, is the principle. We're trying to guide them about what we want them to think and feel at any one moment. So during the presentation, there will be key messages, and at those key messages, we have a clear idea what we think and feel, and we want to guide them on what they think and feel, what they should think and feel. We want to guide their conclusions. And the way that we say something makes a lot of difference. It changes the meaning depending on the way that we say it. So let me give you an example. Here's a sentence I've memorized. It's, Anthony said that his boss did not commit a fraudulent act. And I've shared those words with you, but I haven't given you any indication about how I think about it, how I feel about it. I've simply passed those words over to you. Do them with them what you will. Anthony said that his boss did not commit a fraudulent act. It's a throwaway line. However, there's many different ways to say this sentence. So as an example, I could say to you, well, Anthony said that his boss did not commit a fraudulent act. Well, clearly he said he didn't do it, but probably did, right? Then another way would be to say, Anthony said that his boss did not commit a fraudulent act. It wasn't his boss, it was somebody else's boss. Another way to say it would be, Anthony said that his boss did not commit a fraudulent act. He simply didn't do it. Or finally, you could say, well, Anthony said that his boss did not commit a fraudulent act, ... but he was probably on the edge, right? So the way that you say something really can change the meaning. Now, every sentence has key words that, depending on how you've emphasized them, change the meaning of the sentence. Now, if you have a 20-minute, 30-minute presentation, should you go through every sentence and think about that? Probably that's too much to think about. But you will have key messages along the way. That might be 5, 7, 10, maybe this. You can think about the key moments in your presentation. And those moments, I would really do this exercise. Write out the sentence. Think about which words matter here. Where do I want to put the energy? Where do I want to put the emphasis? And test it out. Say it out loud and hear yourself. So that is a way to make sure that you put the right focus on the key words, that you think carefully about what do I actually mean? What do I think? Which words communicate what I think and feel. And then say it out loud. So if we don't say things out loud, it's really difficult to know, is this really the story I want to tell? Are these the words that I want to use? Now, again, with a 30-minute presentation, should you be practicing the whole thing? Well, ideally, yes. But even if you're struggling for time, make sure that the first 2 or 3 minutes, you've said it out loud. You hear yourself. Are those the words that I want to say? And then the bit that everybody loves to improve your voice is record yourself presenting. And yes, everybody loves this, right? Actually, nobody does. It's really horrible. You hear yourself back and you think, hey, that's not my voice. And our brains get a bit confused because when we speak, our brains process the sound, the vibrations in our skull, and the voice waves, the movement of the air when we're speaking. That's a combination. When your phone or whatever you use to record yourself picks it up, it's only picking up the voice waves, so it sounds different. And our brain thinks, hang on, that's not me. I don't like this. I'm confused. So that's why most of us say we don't like hearing ourselves. But try to put that aside. And your goal when you're recording yourself to presenting is, am I putting energy on the key words? Am I putting emphasis? Is it clear what I mean? Have I put some air around the important stuff? Or is it all melting into one and going into one point, then the next point, then the next point? Am I giving them some air and time to process the information? And when you do this, this will really help you to put that emphasis and focus on the things that you feel, you think, and then that guides what they should feel, what they should think. And finally, consider standing up. Now, I'm not standing up right now, and that's partly for technical reasons. I don't have a setup to be able to stand up, but my wife is a trained voice actor, and when she was trained, they really emphasize you should do your voice acting, your voiceovers for animations, for adverts, standing up. And you should use your hands. Now I'm going to use my hands, and if you can see me in the camera, when you use your hands close to the camera, they get very big. So that's something they recommend against on TV. They recommend not to have too much hand gestures. Now you can use your hands in camera close to your body. That works quite okay. However, what you can also do is use your hand gestures, I'm doing that now, out of camera to emphasize words. And you find that when you use hand gestures like you would face to face, then and when you're standing up, that helps put more energy and more focus into the words that really matter. So think about trying to set up a setup for your computer for you to be able to stand up. It's something that's recommended for voice actors. It can also have an impact for you. So any questions on using your voice in your online presentations? And any questions about anything else that we've had so far? It seems pretty clear. Okay. Mihaly, do you see any questions, or should we carry on?
I don't see questions there, no.
Good. Okay. Then finally, interaction. Now, some of these tools I'm going to mention are maybe more for your own presentations, and one or two of them might be relevant for the sessions next week. But I thought I would leave all of these in because they're useful for any kind of online presentation. So I think it's one of people's biggest concerns, how to interact with the audience. How do you know if they're liking it? How do you know if they get it? And ideally, you know that because you've constructed a great story and you've put all of these tools into place and the things that are your expertise, you've got great content. Nevertheless, there are some ways to interact with the audience when you can't see them. And the three ways I recommend is to have some kind of a welcome, have Q&A, and have polls. And let's take the first one, the welcome. So if you're running a session yourself, you can welcome attendees by name. If you have a list of attendees. Now, I didn't do that this time around because it's not my program, and I don't see the list of people. But sometimes that could be a good thing. If you know the people, it could be a good way to mention people's names. We love to hear our own names. And you can also do that when people raise questions. You can mention people's names by mention by name. Then in terms of Q&A, yeah, as you see, I've built in some opportunities. Now, of course, sometimes people don't ask questions, and maybe that's because they understand everything, or maybe they don't think of questions at that moment. So don't worry if you don't get questions, and do give them clarity on how they can do it. So in this case, I put a slide which says, please ask questions in the Q questions box. If you're running your own program, maybe it's chat. So make clear on the slide, how do they ask questions? Where do they ask questions? And also, it can be a bit chaotic. You know, don't worry about that. It's live. People understand that it might be a bit out of the flow of things. So that's not a big issue. So if you're running your own program, then ideally, you would team up with somebody. If you can team up, you have one moderate and read the questions, and then the other answer. That's what we're doing here. Mihali's read out the question, and then I can answer it. So if you can get somebody else to help you with the moderation, that's great. But if it's really just you, don't worry too much if it's a bit chaotic. It's okay. People understand that. You know, it's one of the things that, of course, we want everything to be perfect, to be seamless, to work great. Equally, if something goes wrong, everyone has had that experience in the last few weeks. There'll be very few people that have had perfect online meetings and presentations. So if something goes wrong, don't worry too much. Just stay calm, fix the problem, and get back into it. And then finally, polls. So there's various ways of having polls. For example, in Zoom, if you're running a Zoom program, you can have them, you have to set them up in advance, and they have simple questions, multiple choice or multiple choice only. There are some other ways of doing it, and I'm not necessarily recommending this for next week because they're all external tools. I think there might be some tools in GoToWebinar, I'm not sure, but you can use things like Poll Everywhere, Mentimeter, and Slido. The challenge with this is that they require external tools, so people need to log in somewhere else. They might be logging into your talk on their phone. Then if they have to go to something else, it's more tricky. The advantage is that they have things like word cloud, quizzes, ranking, etc. There's a lot of tools that are not built into the standard video conferencing tools, but they can give you something extra. But in general, I would say keep it simple. So if you're going to run polls, then keep it simple. Use the tools that are built into the system that you're using, or test, and test again if you're using an external set of tools. So we've covered the 4 key aspects of presenting online: the technology, so especially things like the background, your position of your camera, and clothing make an impact. So that's making a big impact. And then there's some of the other stuff about whether you mute people when they arrive, about your own sound, doing a tech check, and making sure that your internet connection's good. Then there's the contents and the slides, but make sure that you're using as visual as possible. It's not complex for them. They can just absorb what's on screen and then listen to your story. And that brings on to the voice, your voice having a big impact. So say things out loud, see if you can stand up, and think about those key messages. Where should the focus be? And finally, interaction. See where you can build in interaction, question and answer. And if you want to use things like polls and so on, then prepare that in advance. That will help you to feel comfortable and relaxed when you're running your program. So I have a bunch of tools for you, but before that, are there any questions on this, on presenting online? And if there's something I didn't cover that you were expecting, do feel free to raise those questions now in the question box. All right, seems like we covered everything. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to share with you these tools and resources. And firstly, I have an app for you. It's completely free. It's called Pitch Professional, and it is about pitching, but actually many of these tools will be useful for presenting. And maybe some of you do have to pitch a product. You have to do a much shorter talk at some stage. So these will be tools that could help you. And you'll get a lot of pitch tip videos, There are some, there's a thing called the pitch canvas in there as well. And there's short videos to explain all of that. And you also get these pitch tip cards. So there's a bunch of things in there. It's on iOS and Android, and it's completely free. Then secondly, I have the tool called the Speakers Canvas. This link, I will share this link with you at the end on the last slide. Speakers Canvas, as I mentioned, it's a brainstorming tool. Once again, I recognize that you guys are experts, you know your content, but maybe this will help you in brainstorming a little bit. If you want to get some new content or you want to refresh your content, this could be a tool that will help you with brainstorming and thinking through what could be new content or a different way of structuring my content. Then the pitch workshop is also in the link that I'm going to share with you. If you ever have to make a 3-minute pitch or a 5-minute pitch, maybe these tools will help you, and some of them will help for preparing presentations as well, and especially online presentations. And finally, there's a web page which has all of these things packaged for you, and that's at best3minutes.com/hexa13may. So do access all the stuff here. That includes the Speakers Canvas, some presentation tip cards, and the free course and the app there. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. I'm going to leave this slide on for a moment because that is the link. So if you want to take a picture, I guess we'll share that later on as well. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. If you have any last final questions before we wrap up, I'll be delighted to answer. And if you think of something in the future, feel free to just drop me a line on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mihaly.
Thank you so much, David. That was absolutely fabulous. I enjoyed myself very much. Now let me switch on my camera as well while we're practicing real life. You said no problem if we make some mistakes, because it's all live. It all makes it human. It all makes us who we are. So I hope all of you, ladies and gentlemen, enjoyed the session. And thank you so much, David, for these ideas. It reminds me when I started my first few presentations and I launched this sort of Hard Talk HR series, and how many mistakes are made, how many mistakes I'm making. So it was also certainly a good reminder of good practices. And the best part of it, what sort of a biggest lessons learned, is that good presentations is all about practice, practice, and practice. So with that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining this webinar. I hope you find it useful. An additional new information that David is joining the HexaMind Academy as one of our tutors, teaching organizations on presenting online and on pitching as well. So if you find an opportunity to potentially interested in bringing David in your company for an in-company engagement, talk to us. I wish you good luck for preparation for next week's Digital HR Innovation Week. If you have not tested the system yet, go to webinar, and you would like to find out more about how the technical parts are working, just set up an appointment with Rita. We're more than happy to log in anytime before the sessions. Because the sessions are running from 3 to 6 p.m. live, during that, even when you are in a waiting room as a speaker, we shall not have the opportunity to test it. So if you'd like to test it, let's do it now before Monday, or anytime next week before the session starts between 9 o'clock and 2 o'clock 9 a.m. and 2 o'clock in the afternoon Central European time. Thank you very much again. You will receive a short survey in the thank you email. Please do complete. We'd like to make sure it's going to be an even better experience next time. Until then, I wish you well, and I wish you safe, and I hope to see you all next week online for a fantastic online virtual summit. Take care and goodbye.